Hello, my name is Michael, and this is Bore Me to Sleep, the series dedicated to helping people sleep. More specifically, this video will lull you to sleep by boring you with unintelligible nonsense. I wanted to take a moment to apologize for my long hiatus. Life has been hectic with my career, and I had a hard time fitting Bore Me to Sleep into my schedule. That said, I still have a deep passion for this project, and I'm excited to keep it going to the best of my abilities. Thank you so much for your patience and support. It means the world. Here's to you, and here's to more episodes of Bore Me to Sleep. Before we begin, I need to mention something about the ads in previous videos. Since this channel has fewer than 1,000 subscribers, YouTube doesn't allow me to turn them off. I know they can be frustrating, especially if they wake you up. Unfortunately, there's nothing I can do about it. For now. If you'd like to help fix this, subscribing to the channel would be a big help. Once we hit 1,000 subscribers, I'll be able to remove the ads entirely. Until then, if you have Spotify Premium, I suggest listening there instead. It's ad-free. For this episode, I'll be using vocabulary and sentence structure that vaguely emulates Electron Physics 1. I've used machine learning to generate a monologue that doesn't make much sense in order to provide you the same comfort as falling asleep in a lecture. Please don't try to understand the script. Many people enjoy falling asleep to videos like this, but some can't as the material is too interesting. The words I say will vaguely pertain to the subject, but will be fragmented enough where a meaning can't be found. The effect created is a boring lecture where you can't understand or pay attention even if you wanted to. Therefore, I suggest you get comfortable and try to sleep. Let the words wash over you and let your mind drift. If this video helps you do that, please consider supporting. Liking, sharing, and subscribing help these episodes reach other people that need them. I also wanted to thank everybody who watched my earlier videos. Your feedback has been very encouraging, and I'm happy to know that this series is helping people. When I started, I just wanted to help others with their sleep issues, and it's nice to see that it's working. I will now begin the lecture, so please enjoy and sleep well. What if the length of the top deck of the natural frequencies of oscillation has that in the string at both ends, the pulses identical to the pulses up and down the stationary line? The string moves in a position x direction to be along the x-axis. The pulses identical to the pulses up and down the stationary line. The string moves in a positive x direction to be along the x-axis, where is the amplitude of the motion. For any disk of mass m1, and we find that the object then continues to move along the circle before she moves back. From the continuity each pair, identify the area of the dam at a larger tube. In a molecule, the travel between a long and the moment of the vector due to the gravitational force. For a conservative force, we can write expressions for each of the equations. Substitute numerical and f of s. The book moves through the x-axis so that the force exerted by the floor on the nail is zero by the negative of the resistive force. If the magnitude is less than the velocity of the point of the arrow, in this case, a net force does work, is not only of the forces that are a change in the momentum, the kinetic energy of a system is conserved. In this case, if a net force does not change in the system, a kinetic energy, you are therefore forced acting on an object during the collision. Find an expression for the time interval required for the red bead to fall from point to point toward the center of the wheel. Determine the tangential speed of the airplane and the pulley. Its kinetic energy is then transformed to internal energy. To this temperature of these, make some of the energy transfer, whereas mechanical systems are all conserved. What happens to the temperature of the sample if the copper clock temperature is about 25.08 Celsius? By what is this temperature change? If a horizontal is 1 meter at rest, a light cord of length 10 centimeters and a mass of 6.2 kilograms is attached to a spring, and through which a similar statement can be made to thermal equilibrium. If the potential energy of a segment is not constant and has no work, the total energy of a system increases as the tension increases. The block is it. When it is full, we shall use heat, and the volume of the displaced by a displacement dx is one that occurs as a vector. We can express the section in example 5, 15, and 8.3. With a rope to use the symbol kg of for the speed of the earth, the weight of the person exerts on the cord a magnitude of acceleration. For this reason, choose a maximum or when the earth reaches point A. This result is the case of that of the unit of the quantities g can be rewritten as the ratio dx 5 over which is the approximate frequency of oscillation. The wave function, notice that we can have a type of conservation of mechanical energy and the internal energy. Therefore, for a heat engine, a transfer energy by a gas does, in other words, the work done on the surface of the system is equal to the initial maximum magnitudes of the force it is constant. The velocity of the pin must always in time as t in active figure 4.7. The resultant of these three significant figures is the value of reference in the final y above the x and y substitute mg. Its initial acceleration reduces to the original rs final correct units of 18 milliseconds. Therefore, the power P on the gas becomes 1.5 joules. The decrease in energy of the system. This amount is required to raise the temperature of the air to 700 Kelvin, goes into the cold water. Rank, what would you say about the final point of the objects? The axis of the gravitational force that the spring exerts a force of static friction is k. For this example, the mass distribution of a star does not describe what we expect. The maximum speed to a molecule as a particle. We can extend the translational motion of the element of the string at hx. We see that the relationship between these quantities and n, if a system is greater than the magnitude of the normal force, because it is on the verge of outward, and is in a horizontal circle of radius r. In part C, we cannot obtain similar to the result from Newton's second law, chapter 9, linear momentum and collisions building the entire Earth as particles having a large diameter of mass 2 and 3 centimeter radius. Each other end is attached to a wall of the mass m is known 1000 from rest and the strings of a pulse moving down, and notice that the speed is always positive, like the average force exerted by the wall on m2 is equal to the magnitude of the normal force acting on the water and the water. The only way to these forces do not contribute to the torque through the equilibrium. We could calculate the force that must be when he did and she the elevator car. What is the acceleration of the bolt relative to the Earth? The acceleration found in part A is negative. Why is this answer to imagine that the block is in motion? The potential energy of the system is not constant. If so, the system is isolated in terms of momentum but non-isolated if the entire system is isolated, but not only one understanding of its state is the rotational kinetic energies of the smaller ice cube, and a fraction of m and a. It is made from air to this idea why b, the initial velocity, must be positive. Show that the dimensions a, f, and c, it could have been negligible mass. It will be directed along its initial speeds as the positive or negative sign applies to those that is in the description of a pendulum. In this case, we assume the following is valid as a particle moving at the speed of 5.1 milliseconds per second to the east line while traveling back in the branch to the physics. In the first chapter 9, the kinetic theory of gases and the second law of thermodynamics moderate. So far, there are no always points. A heat engine system is one that does doing work. Is the work done by a distance on an object? Determine the tension in the cord when the monkeys will land is the distance from the top window of the incline. The amplitude of amplitude A and is doubled. Its frequency decreases. Its frequency increases. Its frequency remains. The most probable speed, the average speed of molecules in the water in a molecule alone. This equation is of the application of the forces exerted on the piston is equal to the weight of the gas, and the pressure is P0, which is the gas at the bottom and the greater in the pressures of its cylinder. The coefficients of kinetic friction between sled and ice is 0.3. Use energy considerations to find an energy function for block A is what impulse the kinetic energy acting on the particle is smaller than the gravitational force. The Earth's speed is constant. The ball is projected at rest. It experiences a constant acceleration of 20 s per second. What is the minimum energy input required to raise the satellite in the container with a larger diameter of a large number of 100 kilograms? What is the volume of turpentine? What is the temperature of the combined bullets for which each of the swimming car systems in general? From the first law, a third one point can be 5 kilograms, or a piece of balloon on a Ferris wheel that rises to rest when it hits the bottom end. By what force does the cable have time to note that the car is in position? Are given by x5 and t50. Determine the values of F in equation 4. Is any piece of water at the same point? Assume the density of the string is doubled. Why is the shape of the car not going through the ground? What is the force component of the net force on the object of mass m, giving substitute 2 rm and 5 meters squared? The problems found in this chapter may be assigned denotes asking for quantitative, and conceptual reasoning denotes master tutorial available in enhanced. These provide students with targeted feedback that develop reasoning and reasoning. 7 is the air of a material on a single string. Determine the frequency that the wave exerts on the train during points on the top, and an angle of F. With what angle U is that which the differentiate this change in time rate as an element of the medium is in figure 2.4. Notice that the pressure and the gas are given by the equation 21.1. Compute the rotational kinetic energy and evaluate the final speed of the bullet as it leaves the barrel. How much work is done on the gas by the water? In figure 20.1, the temperature of the Earth is 3.3 milliseconds, and 6.0 milliseconds determines the velocity of the car at that position. When the force is applied at the bottom of the wheel, as does not change as the initial volume of the gas, what is the difference in energy of the hammer and the nail as it is in contact with the second spring? Distance d from its equilibrium position from sliding down incline, a second spring of mass m2, 50 kilograms. Find the tension in the wire if both strings and C, the tension at the point assumed horizontal, as an object sliding down on a frictionless incline. The work done on the gas by the gas has the translational volume VI of infinitesimal temperature. We assume the density of air is 1.0 kilograms per meters cubed. What is the density of the helium? The temperature of the gas at these two temperatures, if by the specific heat of water were added to the water, so that the density, the speed, and the frequency of the sound is too well to the audible, the speed of sound. Assuming the sound level is lower than 500 Hz, what is the level of compression in the wire? If the block is just before the original, and assume the block in the string is the speed of the string, its wavelength decreases. The string has shaped its own free end of the spring is pushed so that the chair side from the stage to undergo a time interval dt. The value of the average power to the kinetic energy of a gas molecule in the vessel is F equals 5.1. Because the final pressure is at the pressure of the gas is given by equation 21, is equal to the amount of energy necessary, the temperature rate of energy of metal from 1.0 atmospheric pressure, the friction force on the surface is equal to the weight of the water. The upward buoyant force and the surface is small. In this case, the system could be represented to the initial configuration of the system. An object is when it is released from rest on it, pushing the spring set into a distance equal to 700 Kelvin. What is the magnitude of the force acting on the car? Find the horizontal component of the force exerted by the seat on the child is less than its true weight by larger than on the floor. Is the value of V in part B the same rate of energy transfer by heat? The process is PV equals 5.1 joules. In which is the number of moles of the gas N? What is the thick section 7 kilograms of 7.0 kilograms is hung from the other end of the beam? What is the minimum speed of the block? Additional cold ethyl alcohol is poured onto each other side of the second. The car is a pictorial representation of the track for a non-inertial frame. As an example of an object of mass 1 kilogram, and the cord having a speed of 2.5 meters per second, what is the ratio of the pressure in the fundamental mode? The lowest frequency is 300 Hz, where the frequency of sound is 8. Therefore, the difference in gravitational force from the wall on your hands and therefore called the ball, you are able to model it to roll without losing it, is moving over a straight larger or as a distance of, if the coefficient of friction between the block and is the height h increase, decrease, or remain the same. Energy is transferred by the engine to make a gas. The temperature is raised to 300 Kelvin. A liquid is then into a liquid whose volume is 1.2 kPa. Now the average value of the speed of the particle is the same as the magnitude of d, then the x component of the net force m towards the lowest point. Express your answer for A and B. Causes your answer to generate the problem. But the ball is modeled as a force by applying the force of friction on the sphere. The buoyant force is the same as the x component for the force of the block as the slope of the block spring system. The total energy of the system is the sum of the kinetic energy and the potential energy of the system decreases. For example, we can consider a series by which the magnitude of the weight of the object, the point of the object, and the speed of the rocket is 2, 14.0 kilograms, and 6 meters from the floor. What is the phase change in radians per unit period of the resultant wave? The waves are shown in active figure 16.4. The resultant wave has a small difference in other than the first of the blocks. If the objects are modeled as particles, we need not worry for our circular motion. In the horizontal case, we can use W50 when cos U50, because the disk is at rest. At what time is the angular speed at which its release? Its angular speed at any moment is moment. Can the total work? What are the negatives of the left done by this changing force 9 is called the area of the shaded rectangle in active figure 2. To maximize the angle of the line to be 5.25 centimeters, find the average acceleration of the glider at the moment it passes point towards its front of a plane that oscillating at a maximum angular a vertical linear mass of radius b. What is the limitation on the height of the top of the siphon above, where the third at the flight time interval lands in the ocean at this position? If the tension is 50 meters, as long as he maintains a distance. If so, you are used to using it by the equation considering the analysis model, evaluate the momentum. The statement of these two objects is 0. If the particle s acceleration is zero, the object is modeled as a particle in equilibrium in both the forces on a right hand. Therefore, the block spring system is isolated. But the angular speed of the system is the same before the rod is released. When the friction force on the block, the tension in the string also decreases. The resultant wave is at rest, and then has a radial upward distance of 20 meters from the center of the source. You are also able to move, as you have seen in your previous examples of friction, representing the heat of matter. A field C has the value of atoms. The average translational acceleration of a particle is defined by the time of the instantaneous velocity. Average is negative and the velocity component of the acceleration remains decreased. Hence, the car has not off the highest point of the train before each bounce. Verify the answers to parts C and D in the solution to parts B and C. In parts I and B, and C and D, by what factor does the wheel move across the surface of the Earth? If the system is isolated with no non-conservative forces, the work done on the system is positive. No internal energy is transferred by heat, because the work done by the energy has been discussed in the absence of the motion. We can use the impulse approximation by equation if V1F is equal to V1F50, where TER is 5, where n is the constant, and b, the magnitude of the acceleration of the center of mass is 2 grams. Pivoted at a moment of the angular acceleration, that is, it must be zero at all equilibrium positions. The objects must have to initial acceleration. A wrench is to be and the initial kinetic energy of a particle system. Another collision, a similar statement of conservation of energy is that follows isolated systems. What is the maximum values of resultant x? X and y components are shown in a view of figure 4.1. Your back two vectors is the same for the values of k. What is the change in volume A at the pressure and bottom below for a process? What is in the direction of y? A vector c is called vector quantities. From the center of the bill is the minimum distance from the starting point, the point at which the drops of the pile make a hole at the shape of the ocean where the barge is 9 meters long. After the first, the motor must not move in opposite directions. The direction of this force is opposite to the direction of the displacement. Therefore, if you must use a force conservative, and the force from the wall to be the force of the friction, a free body diagram for the car. As the string is drawn from the air, which is one tube at which the temperature is reduced. Two ideal gases behave like a container, such as a substance, and then the average kinetic energy of the molecules. The energy added to the gas by heat. If the gas is compressed, the pressure of the gas volume is the maximum at which the pressure in equilibrium is the volume of the liquid measured. A solid sphere of liquid uniform mass m is under tension, and the tension in the string, the density of the air, and the density of water is independent of the air. We wish to determine the change in temperature of the conceptualized note that our result shows that may be some easier for multiplying vectors. We will make this approximation by equations 1 and 2. 1 rad, C 18 rad s, whereas the amplitude n is always at a distance of x. Determine the gas at higher temperatures to the point of application F, hence is for an ice cube, such that the cube is of 0 kilograms m3 in the opposite direction. The observed frequency of the sinusoidal wave in a wave. Find the wavelength of the sound. Explain whether the amplitude of the motion increases in a positive x direction. Finally, the velocity should be within the conceptualized step in section 9.4. We define drawn the x and y components of a function of angle A above the case. If there is energy, what would be the kinetic energy of the system before the collision between the and the final points, equally being where the point is? We can then solve this problem, as in which the problem statement rotation is positive, rotating about the axis perpendicular to the page through one point of the particle. We choose that the acceleration between the particle is zero and the sum of the kinetic and potential energies of the molecules are negative, is not. The energy is not A and a unit for both types of its components. The magnitude of the acceleration is constant over a position x direction. If the object is moving and moving towards the right or the earth, between the two blocks are the same. The mass of the floating object is greater than the weight of the fluid. The speed of this pulse reaches the location where r is the speed of sound, in where the acceleration is in opposite, and the force is called A. The ball is an internal to the ground below a distance d from the surface to the table, whereas the evaluate the weight of the object A. What is the centripetal acceleration at which the bead can have completely turned to reach the top of the table? What does the force exerted on the satellite increase as the gravitational force and the planet is at the highest point on the free body of the passenger train pulls on the track? The origin of the 2 points on the right hand and to the right and are of the same initial velocity. If the red car is moving at constant velocity in the x direction, for this time the interval is greater than that of the initially average speed of the molecules are, yes, and the number of mass m is not an amplitude of some amplitude, the resulting motion can be measured from a maximum value of the angle that the puck is at a distance d in the chord. Draw and the diagram in figure 6.20. The resultant force on the particle is a uniform sphere. Hence, the model of the object for the torque equation 7.3 in equation 8.15, its acceleration ax and velocity are in the positive y direction. For the particle, in example 19.7, we will use other results to show them as more. Determine the squeegee's weight by the water as the hinges, assume all the energy are doubled and air would be equal to 0. For example, when U is the plane as the particle, moving along the circle, at any instant the particle has mass m 50 kilograms and the pivot is 0.35 backward. The total mass of the system is V, is larger than g of 6.0 millisecond. The ratio of the force on the thermometer in the case of two particles is equal to the natural frequencies of oscillation of air are vibrating. The fundamental frequency of oscillation, the string is always under the same tension in the string. The string is vibrating in the rod. Within the string, the fundamental frequency of the string were small compared to the angular frequency, that is 1.3 meters. These results are all while dealing with a large number. This step can be described as a model of a system of two particles. The system is isolated for a system of particles. When a net external torque on the system is 0, show that the moment of inertia of the rod while the sphere makes an angle u cosine ux. Find the x-coordinate of the center of mass as a fraction of I. What is the average speed of sound in terms of the changes in frequency f of the arithmetic n? In this case, the value of the force was mf2. We have taken over the axis of rotation. The total mechanical energy of any rotating rigid object is the other object having a length of height away from the Earth. This time is the fictitious force. The car has an acceleration of larger m. If the friction force were described as when they do not meet these motions, it is possible to find the magnitude of force of kinetic exerted by the seat on the balloon is horizontal. What is the total work done by the applied force on the particle as the position x divided by the time interval during which the car moves from the origin 0 and velocity are with a velocity and is independent of the velocity at the time in flight time? What is the net force acting on the car when it is at rest? Equal to the magnitude of friction force d, the friction force that the bead is just before the cord can over the loop. By what maximum is there a minimum speed? What is the RMS speed of the particle? its kinetic energy is zero. It is all simple mechanical energy in terms of kinetic and potential energies, which can be unknown. Consider the macroscopic quantity of gas on you can now be used to make an object. You can choose that in mind that its direction changes by a change in the rocket's orbit. The rocket speed for the satellite h 56.9 milliseconds. Evaluate the initial velocity of the center of mass of the system at a point under the Earth's speed s. Any of the acceleration can be obtained and a 2.0 kilogram ball can be thrown upward at the position of x along a straight line. The acceleration that is initially at rest. In example 4.6, we see that the acceleration of the block and the translational kinetic energy of the system associated with a block sliding on a frictionless horizontal surface determine the magnitude of the force the water exerts on the hatch. Find the magnitude of the torque exerted by the water about a hinge's notice that the force of the kinetic friction in the car is zero. It is because the energy is at the same final temperature and is under its temperature. Its internal energy is measured by the molecules as discussed in section 20.4. It can be used to provide these equations used in equation 14.4, which implies that the path of the gas is defined as the negative sign of the total work done on the gas along the x-axis is given by the expression V equals 50.4. Section 7.4 motion of the mole, and W is the absolute temperature of the metal, which the gas is at ice at temperature pressure and the pressure P. Therefore, the volume of the gas always remains constant. At t equals 5.0, the higher speed of the wave as the projectile approaches the source. Observer B, you move towards the stern of the train. Describe the momentum of the boy and girl. When are they accelerating? Why and when do we have a natural system? With an altitude of 11.2 meters, how much is the magnitude of the gravitational force acting on the child at the top of the ride? M2 on the inside of an alcohol, then energy enters a hot ingot and multiplies the temperature change in the chapter. In this situation, we describe the motion of the car as described by general. The time rate of change of the bullet S, configuration for the change where the total energy of the equations are equal to the kinetic energy of the initial blocks. If we ignore friction or non-conservative in this case, the system can be modeled as a particle under constant acceleration in the y direction, and particle 2 in the time interval dt. The instantaneous velocity at t equals 5 is by s time. We use the impulse approximation. If vi is instead greater than m equals 80, above the floor, estimate the acceleration of an object at a constant speed of 2 milliseconds. The coefficient of kinetic friction between the rock and the roof is 0.4. Find the acceleration of this section at the angle UA of x. The horizontal component statement of the force is very complicated. The spring force and the spring is compressed. This example is a little to measure the temperature of ideal gases to separate. Use equation 21.6 to find the intensity by a maximum radial force that is moved from a center of the wheel, which is consistent with what the net force acting on the particle is, when the force applied is the sphere, and the normal force exerted on the sphere as the passenger as he starts at rest. The force constant and downward on the passenger in section 6.3 in equation 7.8. The total mechanical energy of the system is 2 joules of ice, which in this case, the first law of thermodynamics, the kinetic energy of a system equal to all the energy of the system. This model is the elastic potential energy within the system of the two blocks, are equal in the transfer of energy into the system. This result is the same as the initial direction as that was the maximum acceleration of the projectile. Explain what accounts for this new trip. Does the time? What is its position and negative acceleration? Can we find the stationary of the car because the ball is initially moving? Or with the magnitude of the reaction forces exerted by the fluid on the other of a parcel of fluid is equal to the weight of the piston and the density of the material. Below, the speed of the water increases with speed. What would the level of the pond? How far from the base of the vertical cliff does he throw a stone? The elevator as a baseball, friction along a flat surface. The block oscillates on a frictionless horizontal surface. The coefficient of static friction between the beam and the plane is 0. What angle does the velocity of the block in the higher y direction, and its initial value is given by the definition of a bulk modulus for an adiabatic process. The work done on the gas is the increase in the work done by the spring on the spool is 0. Therefore, the two waves in motion, the xy component of the acceleration of the observer, and a is negative for the interval, in active figure 2, the new total energy causes the system to change momentum. The right of the spring is pulled from xi to xf 50, and the work at the end of the hose in this second trial, P, is the earth S surface to the earth. If we assume the gravitational force exerted by the earth on the object is 0, the rate of a single force is F, the pressure P to evaluate the work done by the evaluate the force, an impulse on the system, and the rate of kinetic energy is conservative. In Chapter 7, we define the principle of conservation of energy as outlined above, and so, for a certain refrigerator, we have assumed to the same consider the behavior of objects. When the temperature is not the same value for solid or substance by object B, figure 10, shows the initial momentum of inertia of the three stars. Find A, the sand in initial speed by the bead, and the other objects are at the positions of the object. We must choose the position to be positive, and the particle is slowing down the x component for the acceleration of the non-inertial observer. Then as our action force, we modeled the system as a particle under the net force in equation 7.6, the component of the impulse from the center of mass of the system, and B, the angular momentum of the system constant. How the force does the pressure in equilibrium if the pressure is 0, so that is, when the shear stress, if the initial velocity of A is to a friction acting on the ground, this drag force acts towards larger, or that the weight of the object displaced by the form, where the slope of the x-line is to the left, and the dimensions of a uniform. This result is the answers to all the energy of the object and the forces acting on the object. This example, the sphere is in figure 5.1, because the block is at rest. Now, suppose the block at a block comes to the original configuration. If an external force acts on the system, such as a can, the system is isolated. There is no kinetic energy in terms before, and 20 m1s. Assume the father and the hinge are again. The normal force exerted on the train is therefore, the forces does not accelerate. You have the following. Give a second rock or a crane lifting a bucket on a frictionless horizontal surface. The beam of the solid to the same block makes a compression is even for a throw or a combined load and can be solved with only section 6.3. An object speed distribution is applied to the object by a net external force that causes the change in direction of the impulse. As you can see from table 14.1, where the pressure on the dam per is the same, find the kinetic of area A, find the length of the rod, find the ratio of the volume of the hydrogen gas at Ti 5YF. We will find the temperature of the gas at the same temperature. What if the total energy of the system to change its volume? The energy has the largest temperature on our sign for 0 sign. This behavior is common to the solution. We can use it to find expressions for the total work done on the gas. The increase in internal energy of the gas, the result of these gases increases. The temperature of a gas and the two volume levels consists of an object that several small mass are the same result for both objects. Suppose the radius of the sphere is equal to a tangential acceleration of the medium through its radius, and is the amplitude. What is the wavelength where point where the car passes the bottom end of the rod receives? Calculate the frequencies of the fundamental from the wall. Compare the value of the acceleration in the x direction and the motion of the particle energy between the points and y coordinates of a point in the xy plane. We can use the net energy of the system we have defined as the internal energy associated with its internal energy. Therefore, there are no differences between the values and directions, and are the direction of the gravitational acceleration in Chapter 9. Consider the isolated system x and f. The proportionality between the initial and final position x is the position of the object. Its speed is larger, it should be in, from the question when u is fixed. The height will be positive, noting that r5 is equal to 0. From the geometry in Figure 9, we see when two vectors are constant, we have the same quantities and the problem and therefore produce 1. Moves from the center of a table. It is a speed distribution of water waves. If you have explored a graph paper of a single force and then must be applying to the spring is at the position x equals 50. Write the position of a ball as a function of time for gives the initial position of the oscillator and y equals 50. The direction is that of the radial force is not the same in a direction of 0, because this time interval change in its period increases with its speed and always in the y direction is a minimum, in which one of the acceleration of the two blocks never before the car. Draw a force diagram of this element, showing the forces, and we have chosen the x-axis to the coordinate axis as a function of time. Determine the position of equipment flying in the approximate. As it begins to the final temperature of the collision, it is isobaric. Therefore, we call the energy function in equation 8.5 show that energy q dt5a reduced can be categorized the process between the kinetic energy of gases. The model of a substance in which the object moving in a straight line is given by the expression, and because of t equals 5, 10 milliseconds, what is the velocity of the block when it is at an angle of f? Assume the wire is at this geometric center. Explain the pressure. The gas has the same at the pressure of the volume of the water, which is the difference between the free fall and the initial speed. To find the greatest net force of the brick wall, we also predict that if an object is of mass m1 hanging by a cord of length 1.8 meters, a mass of 0 kilograms has radius of 1 centimeters and 3 centimeters has a tangential speed of 20 meters per second. The student throws her center of the train, seeing the order of the component of its velocity, in the motion of situations in the x direction, to a constant acceleration of motion. Analyze the model such that the actor at the particle under any friction force and the acceleration of the rocket is always calculated in this example. If the block is initially at rest, and the final speed when the bead reaches its bottom first, what are the velocity of the car at t50? In the time chapter P2. Because the two vectors are the same for speeds and categorize, we can use the equations for I. Describe that the center of mass of a system of mass is of the sum, if not larger than the larger radius. Therefore, the work done by the gravitational force on that is the one of the sun. Find an expression for the final pressure. The result for the slope, that is called the equation. Therefore, the function expression for the speed of a sphere of radius gives hr 5, 1g. The trap has a mass of radius 50 m. The top of the rope is at its lowest point. Determine the tension in the string on the string and that the string is to reach the lowest point. Will the fired from an initial VI at 25 meters per second in a circle of radius 0 meters, the distance from the limb to the ground to the farthest point. And the second power must be equal to the mass of the object reflecting from the rotation axis through its center of mass, is the center of the gravitational force. Therefore, for the problem in this case, the car does not have identified as a tension or the eraser slides. Find the tension in the cord when the monkey of two strings are on the same opposite parts. What is the acceleration when the object is hanging from a point vt, as its initial position and the final position in the time interval is given as the time rate of change? Does the change in kinetic energy of the car when we expect the larger change in kinetic energy, non-isolated system, show that the moment of inertia is of the same order of magnitude and opposite in the direction of the force exerted by the wall on the block is parallel to the elastic potential energy increases by the amount of energy? For this situation, a system does not interact with the environment. These forces are extended to each other and are said to be its acceleration by force net torque due to its gravitational force acting on it. Once this statement is always terms of the same units. Before, and the magnitude of its acceleration of the center of mass of the system. Therefore, the law of linear momentum is constant, and the value of the average force that must be equal to zero for such a small process, we can identify the total energy before the collision as perfectly inelastic collisions. Does the particle have both magnitudes? The rate of change in a harmonic increase or the increase in temperature of the volume by the work done by the spring on the bullet. Find the magnitude of the force with a constant acceleration over a long time interval dt, as shown in Figure 2. If the surface spins rapidly, the translational speed of the object increases when the floor is moving. Does the block move to the left with speed v if we choose to be able from above the approach? Can your model the particle is being released from rest at the top of the table at the answers in reality? The fluid would not cool. The rod in equilibrium, the torque resulting in the body diagram for the block. In Figure 7, we identify the ball as the spring and the spring. As the book falls back to this instant to the right, when the car is suspended from a car moving in a circular path at a constant speed, at the instant it lands on a horizontal rod of height h, they are moving towards the stern. They can undergo circular motion perpendicular axis in the same direction for such as hosted in Figure 5. The pendulum bob moves exactly the distance in Figure 4. We use the impulse approximation to find the energy that results for Vf equals 50. If there were more unknowns, how would you have this new fundamental frequency? Why does this answer to be about what direction of the fish? If the coefficient of kinetic friction between the block and the surface, what is the final pressure at the grater? 1 centimeter, 8 centimeters, or 5 meters? What was the average force on the car? The same force exerted by the earth on the chain and the friction force exerted by the pulley on the cord is 2. Calculate the initial speed of the moving objects, the maximum height by the earth in this example. Consider the one case that moves from you with equation for the time constant. We can study equations 10.3, 12.3, and the values are the values obtained from these data from this second. We see that the distribution of energy from a gas, a dm in temperature, and Tc, is a term energy that is proportional to the power nature of the change in potential energy. In this case are the change in the kinetic energy of the system and the final kinetic energy of the system is zero. The non-conservative forces are acting. The top of the surfaces causes the pressure to the ground. If the pressure is zero, and the area of the shaded rectangle in figure, notice that an object is in motion about the action that would be very good. This example, a noise less than 2 people are moving at the frequency of a reference frame. Therefore, we should use equation 1 to solve for the definition of the angular momentum. Use equation 11.12, to which we choose to obtain the right side of equation 8. When the spring is linear and t50, what is the velocity of the truck immediately after the collision? What is the phase of the wave? What is the speed of the stone immediately before it strikes the earth? What is the energy of the system? What is the time interval for which the wind must change from the negative of r? By two equal estimates, the time interval required for this trip around the section 12.1 angular position and gyroscope is equation 10.10. The quantity can be expressed as follows, where dx is a positive dx. If dx is positive, and then increases by increasing, while the mass of the air increases and the compressed air rises with the same depth, the pressure on the piston is 1 K, and the compression on the diesel engine is 1 during the time interval dt. Find the angular acceleration of the bridge just as it starts to move. What is the mechanical energy of the clay cylinder system constant in this process? Explain stationary. We would this problem based on memories observing from wall in your model, the ball as a particle under a net force. Because we are considering only one instant for the time interval from the time 15s to fall, as the time is from one of the stones. What is the total time interval for the entire 36-meter drop? If the total mass of the Earth is mf, therefore, the object should be lifted from rest, it is possible to load the ground. A low friction force is shaped, not equally high. What happens to the curve of the wave? In Chapter 20, heat and temperature of dT must be constant in order to convert a specific heat of C at temperatures and final specific heats. What is the change in internal energy of the system by heat, so that there is its shape perpendicular to the page, and being at the top of the wheel, solve this problem with the angle U. It is also a new or fully to physical contact with its surroundings. Two mechanisms are elastic, and the forces of objects is deformable. We shall show the distribution of energy of a system of gas molecules. F is located at each end of the rod as shown in figure 34. Calculate the tension of the free objects, the tension in the string supporting the lead sphere, as the string, as it decreases, then does, and up and a second ball is to the brick. 50 meters high above the floor, it is at rest with a constant speed. If you solved upward a friction force, we shall treat Newton concerning this, the Earth on the Sun and becomes 3,104 kilograms. What is the maximum distance from which the ball clear and fall it to the speed of the block when it is rotating with some angular acceleration? Show that the angular momentum vector can be expressed in terms of the force. Substitute the appropriate for the unknown variable. The magnitude of the acceleration of the objects, the tension in the string as in figure 20.8, the pressure is negative when the temperature decreases, the temperature increases to 1, the sample of these gases are very slow to determine the most probable speed. Determine the most probable speed, as well as the draw force. The acceleration of the block of mass m2 is found from the integral of collisions in the air from 50 meters above the ground. Find the minimum power output of the engine in the balls by the heat capacity of the liquid. This is by the gas and is most likely at the bottom of the tank. Why do we swim next to determine the velocity of the car as it leaves the barrel? At what height the force exerted by the locomotive on the floor. With the force on your as the object on the pivot, then the center of the wheel for rotation, the translational acceleration of the wheel is on a frictionless particle. We also know that u equals 50. Therefore, the angular momentum of the system equals the total angular momentum of the system at the instant the can undergoes conceptualizing. Analyze our models. If it's a particle under the influence of the gravitational field, the two blocks lie in the same set. The two moving in figure 4.21 represents the speed of the wave. What is the amplitude of the amplitude of the motion can be determined by y1 and y2 are in the vector x having a y component, and negative acceleration arises from the horizontal direction to which the block moves in a circle of radius 6m. And we have a mass of m51 kilograms. Express your answer in the same direction as we take the gravitational force. We can describe his friction force on the puck as it moves away from the reference point by the linear wave using equation 17.13 to r, which frequencies above the tuning fork. Sound waves are mounted on a pipe, one end of the string to the vertical. If you have different angular speeds, does this indeed mean that the average velocity is required to be zero? We can also now apply the gravitational force between the two different positions. The velocity of a point of the particle at any time at puck t50, the x component of the velocity is independent of the path of the puck. The acceleration of the object moves from the origin to Vs if the total work done by the gravitational potential energy of the system is only spring S kinetic energy. You will see an answer such that the roller, so we have a magnitude of gravitational force acting on one object, varies from a fixed point. The spool rotates in a horizontal plane. It's also increased in speed uniformly as the gravitational force. Though this buoyant force is, or the best theory of motion is, we can express the net force as rearranging this expression for noting that the total external forces acting on the monitor is equal to the tension in the string. The spring stretches by 35 centimeters from rest. Find the distance of which the object makes this distance x is the potential energy of the system when the block travels. When the book hits the ground, the amount of water to accelerate before is raised to the same. The time interval between fluid is where the velocity vector is called an angle equal. We can now consider systems, one in which the more massive than the particle. Model of the non-isolated system. We can use the impulse approximation to equations 1, 2, and c. The energy transfer Q must be negative. The work done on the surface equals the values of the work done by the force on the particle. The magnitude of the displacement of the block, and b, the force constant of the spring water and the block hits the spring. Before the sphere is for the ball. If the rate of revolution of the cylinder is made by what amount is the volume in the pump is the final temperature. In fact, the work done on the gas is positive because the rate of change is proportional to dm and dt. It's also related to system S, position vector r. The concept of momentum, so the kinetic energy associated with any molecule, has the total energy of a system. This result is consistent with the appropriate problem. The particle has a tangential velocity and a tangential component with respect to the incline. The car is moving with the speed of moving away from the source. Calculate the air at the bottom of the bar. Solve for the initial final speed of the gas, equation 7.14. Finalize this solution. The magnitude of the friction force increased by the factor of the force is 22m. Find the maximum transverse speed of an element of the string. What are the maximum transverse velocities of the element at any time t, where t is the angle, which is the wave function at which that is, the fundamental frequency f is f 150 MHz. The length of the rod equals the tension in the wire. How much string will be in this expression, and the mass of the quantity is the same as the ratio of the length of the earth. The hole in the final point increases because the energy is at equal to the temperature of the gas, that no new molecule was changed of energy. Determine the amount of work done on the gas by heat. Because the atoms are an ideal gas, you may use absolute pressure to determine whether or crown made from the fluid too. The rate of the air to the hearing, very large, the car's acceleration, at what time the object will travel before and releasing the next point, with what time interval is required for any sound to make any sinusoidal wave in one of the pipe lengths. When the air column is where R, what is the larger coefficient of static friction coin, and on the floor with a friction force of 2000 newtons load? The object accelerates to the right at the origin, because G is considered as where a net force acting on it is zero, and the acceleration in figure 4.19, the angular displacement of the rigid object is the same mass m, and it represents a large net force. The puck moves on a frictionless horizontal surface with a constant velocity of 4 milliseconds, and a constant acceleration claims that the lift does not break. The acceleration of the buoy moves the same distance from the Earth as the ice cube. Assume the two ice cubes meet in a collision with the system at the center of the mass of the ice, which is similar from equation 8.21 to the kinetic and direction, which is independent of the mass of the surface. The work done by a fixed force on an object and the particle under constant velocity, if the net force acting on an object is zero, choosing upward with an initial speed u in the positive x direction. Find the magnitudes of the forces in the terms of n forces, the speed of the block, and the coefficients of kinetic friction between the block and the surface is 0.250. If the measured force is removed from the liquid of the string, for what reason is the angular frequency v of the wave? At what time should the speed be of the sphere where? What is the acceleration of the bolt relative to the Earth? What is the temperature of the atmosphere at this location? With the time required to be moved along the length of the string, in this case, the standing wave in active figure 16.10 represents the relationship between x and amplitude. For each element, elements of the element at the position of x50 and the blue bead comes to the free fall below. The thickness of the drop is to I before and is the coefficient of friction between the rock and the surface of 0.4. When the object reaches a distance r and also I, in this situation, the work tends to this imagination that blocks a system have some extent in the wheel. These two forces give an equal force on each wheel. Find the net torque due to the final gravitational potential energy. But the ball remains stationary. The ball rises too. Assume its elastic potential energy is not kinetic energy from the system, and U other forms as well as the associated with the car S in motion. The particle is displaced to the left and then released by a distance d, and the final value when the speed must be maximum. Another quantity, the scalar product is the sum of the volume of the gas at the same time interval. This concludes the 1-hour lecture. By now, I hope you've fallen asleep. If not, you might consider playing another episode from this series or simply replaying this one. Thank you for listening, and I hope you fall asleep soon.